As we continue with today's focus on the state of our democracy, is it time to rethink our electoral system? Should we change to a system which makes the president and MPs more accountable to their constituencies and less to their parties? Do we look at the electoral system used in America? To discuss this, we are joined by Associate Editor at the Daily Maverick, Brooks Spector. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Spector. We do appreciate it. Perhaps that's my first question to you. Do we have to relook at the system? Do our ministers, MPs and president get away with just too much?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, and it's one that's been debated in this country really right from the beginning of the new Constitution. And it's been debated historically in countries that changed the nature of their governance from, say, a monarchy to a more representative democracy. And the answers are, they're varied answers. In the U.S. and in the United States, members of Congress are elected every 2 years from defined districts. Senators are elected every 6 years, to a state, whether the state is huge or small in population terms. And the president is elected in a kind of direct election, state by state by state. You win that state's population, you get its total population weight when the final tally is made. Other countries have come up with different ideas. I mean, in Japan and Germany, for example, they have multi-member constituencies, 3 or 4 members to the national legislature. And the idea there, I think, is that if there is a solid minority of people who believe that Party X is better than Party Y, their views should at least get enough of a hearing that they get 1 of 3 or 1 of 4 representatives to the national parliament. You have other countries that have a mix of national elections so that you treat the entire country as if it were one constituency. In other words, proportional representation combined with multi-member districts. Then you have a place like Israel, which is pretty small, 7 million people or thereabouts, and the whole country is effectively treated as if it was one constituency, and proportional representation holds sway there. And each of these systems, each of these ideas has merits and some demerits. I mean, you can look at the members who have joined the U.S. Congress, and you can scratch your head over some of those people, how they managed to get there. Not just because you get elected is no guarantee of your smarts, your street smarts, or your sanity, I guess. One of the people who helped create the American Constitution, James Madison, who went on to become a president in the early 1800s, and he basically written a good chunk of the Constitution after having studied representative governments as far as they could back in the 1780s, examples from Europe, ancient Greece, and so forth. And he concluded with advice, if all men were angels, there would be no need for government. Unfortunately, all men are not angels, or women for that matter, at least now. And the end result is, in this country, if you remember, von Seyl-Slobert's commission years ago recommended a switch over to, at least in part, a constituency-based election. But if you remember further, when the Constitution was first written, the idea was afoot that the country as a whole was too unfamiliar with the idea of voting and with representation to have the kind of argumentative elections between parties in every district across the country, and that maybe sometime down in the future that might be possible, but not now. So your real question is it now time to begin to make that switch? And I think this is really something that requires a serious national conversation, looking at all the examples around the world and trying to figure out which one works best for a country that is divided ethnically, racially, geographically, it's big, economically, it's divided steeply. And I don't have a solid answer for you, but I just try to give you a big context.
Yes.
There's a big smorgasbord to work with.
Sorry, I just have to interject there because I don't have much time. But just given
Sure.
what South Africans go through on a daily basis, and given the state of our country, many would say that democracy is perhaps not working anymore, and it might not be necessarily because we are a democracy, but because our ministers and government officials are just not understanding the real issues on the ground. So, maybe I'm rephrasing the question from my first question, but do you think there needs to be an overhaul? Do you think there needs to be a relook at it, or do you just think that we're not just dealing with things in the wrong kind of way?
I think there are genuine grounds for looking at it and thinking it through, just as the late Francois Slaughter did. But I'd offer another example for you. Britain is undergoing what some people would refer to as a constitutional crisis. There, all the members of the parliament are elected constituency by constituency, except for the House of Lords. I'll put that aside. But when it comes to electing a party leader in Britain, it isn't a national choice. It's in the case of the Conservative Party, it's about 200,000 people who are members, paid up dues-paying members. And in the case of the Labour Party, I think the volume of votes is larger, but again, it's not a national direct election either. And all of these examples, what they really tell you when you put them together and you look at it, you say, there are ample grounds for rethinking what you have, but you really you want to be careful not to jump out of the frying pan and into a high temperature fire by encouraging a situation where there's even more acrimony at the national parliamentary level than there might exist already. One other point, just leave it here. In cities and in provinces in this country, members are elected by constituency. And that tells you that it's possible, that the citizenry of the country seems capable of doing that, certainly. But is it appreciably better than the party list that you have now? I don't know. But I think the national conversation needs to be had. People like eNCA should help lead that conversation.
Thank you so much for your insights. We do appreciate it. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't. That was Associate Editor Brooks Spector. Now, still to come on today, we'll have more news and all your developing stories. Do stay with us.